Welcome to the Tao of Sports podcast with Troy Kirby, covering sports business with over 300 industry leaders from across the globe. Now, here is your host, Troy Kirby.
Thank you for listening to the Tao of Sports podcast. I'm Troy Kirby, along with episode 888 of the podcast. Today's guest, Andrew Rubinstein. Now, he's of Lake Superior State University up in Michigan, up in the remote part of Michigan. And it's interesting to kind of see somebody who is in ticket sales, especially group ticket sales, getting on the march for the annual funds, the development side of athletics. I think that this is kind of where that ask is going to change a little bit. Gen X, which is the generation that's starting to peel away as the older generation, as our baby boomers tend to move on, they want different things than their parents did. In terms of annual fund giving, it doesn't mean they don't give. But then after that, what do millennials, do, and how are millennials thinking? And I think it's different to actually have that conversation with somebody who is in not only ticket sales, but group ticket sales. He did it at the professional level, both at minor league hockey as well as professional baseball with the Padres. Great conversation with Andrew Rubinstein right here on episode 888 of the Tao of Sports. Andrew, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Annual funds have changed over the years. One of the things that surprises me about development, people have not mentioned that really the NIL has really separated out what used to be common development, and now it's starting to siphon out to different areas. How are you able to kind of handle that change? Because you might not be getting credit for things that you were normally annually fundraising for.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. Actually, and I'm gonna try and look it up here real quick. Our athletic department just signed an agreement with a company that focuses on NIL. So really, our new athletic director, Tori Lindley, who came on board back in November, talked about this. So the athletic department just signed an agreement with Teamworks Influencer, which is meant to strengthen our NIL programming. And really the way we look at it is it's a tool for us, right? It's a tool for our coaches to be able to recruit and say, we have this infrastructure in place. And really the mindset has to be, this is going to help everyone. And so I don't look at it as something that's going to take away from us, but something that's really going to strengthen our program, strengthen our student athletes and their experience, strengthen just the overall opportunity that's out there. We're not the Alabamas of the world, so to speak, and so none of our student athletes are really going to be going out and signing multi-million-dollar NIL deals, but especially with the Division I hockey program, I'm sure it's only a matter of time before we have some of our star players or student athletes take advantage of that. But really, we look at it as a way to plus up our programming, and I'm just not worried about things getting taken away from us. I think maybe there'll be a little bit of that, but I think more so it's going to open more doors for us. Like I mentioned, a recruiting tool, and if our teams start winning more because of it, or we get student athletes who help us compete at a higher level, it's just going to help. What's the saying? Rising tide raises all ships, so to speak, is how I look at it.
But I guess how I would frame it is, okay, so you've got that person with a business downtown, their car dealer, whatever, and they've normally been able to give to your annual fund a certain portion. But if all of a sudden they start taking that money and using it for, directly to the NIL or the players, doesn't that kind of hurt the overall, fundraising effort? Because you might give more, you might get less, but at the same time, it's not necessarily directed towards benefiting the entire student athlete as a whole. Yeah, the athletic department, which is really what ends up needing the most funds, right?
It's true. I guess I just take a more optimistic view of it. So if we get a basketball player, a volleyball player, or a hockey player that decides to stay for an extra year because they're getting NIL money, and that in turn allows the team to compete. And I'll use our basketball team as an example. They made a run to the Sweet 16 this year, and the donations that came in because of that because of that success wouldn't have happened in some cases without that success. So if all of a sudden now a student athlete's going to stay because they have that NIL money, it kind of supports itself. So yes, short-term thinking, there could be some of that, but looking at the more holistic long-term picture, I think it's going to be more helpful to us than beneficial, or than hurt us.
So when you're coming out of professional sports, which you have, you come into the world of college athletics, a little different. But what type of nuances have you brought to the table that maybe a lot of them hadn't thought about in terms of not just ticket sales, but also the idea of how we're actually going to go after and increase the membership model for really college athletics?
So I think for us, and my role is pretty unique. And so my background coming into this position, not only athletic related is my focus on athletic fundraising, but I also help support the athletic department. So for our hockey program, help sell all of our suites for the D1 hockey team. I've been able to assist the athletic department from a sponsorship standpoint. So a couple of years ago, we got a video board in the hockey rink for the first time. So I was able to work with our associate AD and athletic director at the time to help sell those sponsorships. And so what I've noticed, and coming from the ticket sales world, right? You're always asking questions, always asking for different opportunities. So kind of bringing and it's already being done to some degree, but really taking that focus on asking the right questions, right? If I'm talking to a school principal on the ticket sales side of things, I'm asking, okay, what fundraisers is your school doing? Do you have a band? Do you have a choir? So as I'm talking to a former student athlete, I might ask them not just, okay, do you want to support this project for this specific sport? Who are they friends with? What sports did they play? What other organizations or clubs on campus were they involved with? We used to have an MBA program at Lake State. That program is now coming back, which is opening up other doors with some of these MBA grads. Okay, now we have the chance to not lose student athletes who are going to go do their grad school at another university and continue to play. How can we tie in that MBA program with athletics and support them on that front? So it's really taking that mindset of what we learned all the way back in inside sales training of asking those questions and continuing to drive that home and bring that mindset and try to uncover opportunities is how I've approached it. One of the challenges, there is no doubt in the university environment and from a development standpoint, things typically move a little bit slower than the ticket sales side of things. So it could take a year plus working with someone to even get them to make that first smaller donation. We're on a ticket sales side of things when you're selling flex plans and quarter season and half season, a lot of times it's a little bit more transactional. So there was definitely an adjustment there from how that works.
So you came into this role, you had about a year, and then COVID hits. With the donations and annual fund, it's a little bit different than even ticket sales because you've got to make the ask. You've got to develop relationships, but you also have to really have that face to face. I know people may assume that Zoom will compensate, but does it really compensate when it comes down to, developing that trust and knowing that those people can be in front of you?
Yeah, so we're in a unique situation up here in that we're already a little bit remote. So for those who don't know where we're at, we're about 5 hour drive north of Detroit, on the border with Canada and Northern Ontario. So across the bridge, we have the Sioux Greyhounds who are in the middle of a playoff run in the OHL. That's where Wayne Gretzky kind of got his hockey started. So we're already in a situation where we're remote. So we were doing a lot of those things and having to adapt pre-COVID. So for us, we really have to take advantage of opportunities to get out of the Sioux. So last year when our hockey team played at Michigan State, we were doing an event down there. When our basketball team is playing in men's and women's basketball are playing in Grand Rapids, we're doing an event down there on the west side of the state and really trying to broaden our reach. And then personally for me, I'll use the example of 2 years ago. I'm out in Arizona. I know one of our basketball alums lives out in Arizona, so even though I'm on vacation, right, I reached out to him and said, "Hey, I'm going to be out in the area. Do you want to grab coffee or grab lunch one day?" He wasn't there, but I still stopped by his office, dropped off a Laker flag. It since then has turned into a donation towards one of our capital campaigns, but really taking advantage of those opportunities to get in front of people. For us, it was interesting. COVID hit. And then our hockey team, we went into a capital campaign to renovate the locker room from our hockey alums, which you might think that's probably not the best time to go into a capital campaign for something like that. But we were able to build a lot of relationships over the phone, over Zoom. And just now, 4 years later, a lot of guys, it's giving us a reason to ask them to come back to campus or take advantage of them coming back on campus because now they're able to see the fruits of that labor, so to speak. But we were already doing some of those things. But you're right. A lot of those relationships, it's a lot better face to face. There's no doubt about that.
Becoming coming from the world of ticket sales, it's a lot of quick. We have this one event we need to buy. You need to buy group tickets, etc. You're going for the long-term ask. How did you kind of weigh that and kind of challenge yourself to kind of know that you've got to push back a little bit on even the anticipation or the quick turn and burn to make sure it's a longer ask than 5 minutes?
I think you just have to keep the long game in mind when you're working with something, and you need to do that with ticket sales as well. Some of my biggest clients might have started as something small, and then you kind of keep that relationship building over the years. But like I said in the beginning, it's just keeping that mindset open to asking those questions. And then for me too, especially in a small town with our local donors, ingraining myself in the community. And I always say I go to different events and do things because I want to be there, not because I have to be there for my job. Like my wife is from here originally, so we have a bunch of family here. I'm also on the city commission. She's on some local boards here as well. So a lot of times I find I might sit down with someone on a conversation related to the city that turns into a conversation around Lake State or vice versa. I'm meeting with them on something related to Lake State donation wise, turns into conversations around the city. So really making sure to ingrain myself in the community. And it's a different I have found this is the first job in my career where I'm living somewhere because I want to be living there, not necessarily because of the job itself. I love the job itself, and I don't plan to make any changes anytime soon. But it's definitely a different mindset because the city needs the university needs the city, and so it's kind of a collective effort, and I think that shows through as I'm making those asks to people that I truly care and want what's best for the university because it's just going to help all of us in the whole community.
So you come from the world of minor league hockey, which I still think is kind of the unsung hero. They haven't been destroyed as much as minor league baseball did when they had that 2020 takeover. You were with the Lehigh Phantoms. You did group sales. Kind of explain the dark arts of group sales because you're dealing with really a group leader that may or may not be interested even in your product, but they got kind of hit with the idea that they have to go arrange this. So how do you make it easy for those folks? Because nobody ever talks about, hey, giving them a spa package or something else other than the game. And here they might just be the person that got kind of roped into, wrangling cats.
I think that it's funny because at the start of my career, and it evolved pretty quickly, right? It was still the paper order forms that you send home with the kids in their backpack, and there's still some value to that. But now with tools like Fivo and Spinzo, you have to be really careful. And as you're training sales reps, you don't want them to get lazy with those tools, right? You still have to train the group leader of this is going to be the most effective way to use it. But with those type of tools, I think it takes some of that angst off the table. And I'll even put it into the reverse role now with what I'm doing when we host alumni events. So we do groups. One of our most successful group nights that we do is with the Detroit Red Wings. And I think they've gone back and forth between Spinzo and Fivo. But regardless, with both tools, coming from that group sales environment and understanding what I need to do as a group leader, has allowed us to have group nights of 200 to 300 people coming to those games. Now, the flip side of it, if it was back in the old school and we had to purchase a block of tickets up front, we just wouldn't be able to logistically do it. But because we have some of those tools like Spinzo and Fivo and know how to effectively use them, it's allowed us to be successful with some of those events. And that's probably been one of the most fun things for me, is when we get to do those type of events, being able to put on my group leader hat, so to speak. And then again, taking advantage of those events. We did a Red Wing game in February of 2020, right before COVID hit, knowing we were going to be going into a locker room renovation campaign. Well, what happened at that event? We had a lot of our hockey alums. I was able to get face to face with them right before that campaign started. So it's just been a big thank you to those tools for existing, because it's made things a lot easier.
How do you keep group leaders from tiring out or groups that become jaded? I mean, when you dealt with that at the Phantoms, I assume that there are people that say, hey, I can get something better elsewhere, or they're just not doing a group this year. How do you make sure that they're still on the chain?
Sometimes it just goes back to asking the right questions, and I always talk about too, you want to set them up for success. So I always use the example, especially with newer reps who would get super excited of like, oh, this group is going to do 500 people, and it's like, okay, what is going to happen? What are they saying, or what is going on that's actually going to justify that happening? All of a sudden, the group comes in at 250. The group leader gets jaded and say, we were hoping for 500. We only got 250. This was a failure. Versus if you're asking the right questions, you're setting a realistic goal, and let's say they're saying, okay, I think realistically the first year we can get 200 people. All of a sudden they get 250 and they're like, wow, we raised more money than we thought we were going to off of our fundraiser, and we had 50 more people come out, and this was such a great experience. That's part of the mindset. And then the other piece of it is I've always found is not being afraid to ask those questions. Like, you almost have to have a sixth sense of what is someone thinking, what is their concern, what are roadblocks, what are things that they don't want to deal with. And sometimes it's been as simple as the choir director is like, all of a sudden it comes out, well, it was a dumpster fire when we got to whatever rink we were at, and it wasn't easy to wrangle everyone up, and we were trying to get them here on a bus. And it's like, okay, how can we help troubleshoot that pain point so it doesn't become an issue? Or how can our staff take things on to take elements off your plate where we can, to make it so it doesn't become a hassle for them. But naturally you're going to have group leaders that turn over, and it goes back to asking those questions of, okay, as a group leader, who else is assisting you on this? Who else is helping you on it? Okay, let's say it's a parent that has a senior. Well, that person's going to be graduating, so it's not waiting. Oh, this is going to be great, we'll deal with it next year. It's getting ahead of it and saying, okay, who helps you with this? Who's going to take over this moving forward? And sometimes I find reps are afraid to just ask those questions because they're afraid of any pushback. It goes back to the donation side of things. You just got to ask. And sometimes you got to raise eye levels a little bit too, to make people see, okay, no, this makes sense and isn't going to be, you just got to not be afraid to be told no or to get some pushback.
Well, the other thing is, what if you had a really great group leader, and we've all had those, right? The people we're just simpatico with, they've been great over the years, and then all of a sudden they switch over contacts and suddenly it's a Karen. How do you deal with that? Because you don't want to lose the sale, you don't want to lose the commission, you also don't want to have it where your boss is upset at you, but you've now got this person that's just, maybe just a grumpy bear. How do you deal with all of that? Because you mentioned oh, this didn't work, this didn't work. But are there group leaders, and I assume there are, that are just unreasonable with what their expectations or asks are?
Absolutely. And I mean, part of it is, right, you're dealing with people, it's the nature of the beast. But I always look at it as, if you consistently do the right things, yes, group sizes are going to fluctuate up and down. But ultimately, if you're doing the right things, going back to the long game, you're going to set yourself up for success. And it goes back to those relationships, right? You could sit there as a rep or manager and say, oh, this person's being difficult, this person's being frustrating. you could have caught them on a bad day or a bad week or a bad year. But it's doing those consistent things. And even if someone's being difficult, still setting that appointment, still meeting them for coffee, still meeting them for lunch, still inviting them down to the rink, still doing those things consistently the right way. But sometimes you're just going to lose that battle, and we've all had it. And it's making sure you're not riding that roller coaster too high, or getting too frustrated as it drops down too low, and just understand that consistency is the most important thing. And just know sometimes group leader is going to switch over, it's going to suck, and the group's going to go down, but it's making sure you're doing the right things, even when it doesn't work out.
So I've seen in your past you've moved around a bit. I mean, it's always good for a career, but have you ever been in a situation where it just wasn't a good fit? And if so, how did you kind of make sure that you stuck it out enough that it didn't hurt your career when you moved elsewhere?
I've been really lucky that I've gotten to work for some really good organizations, both in the American Hockey League, and in the Padres with Major League Baseball. I think for me, there probably are some times where it would have been worth it to stick it out a little bit longer. I'll use the Tucson Roadrunners a little bit when I went over there. I think in that case, the Coyotes at the time were looking to get a new arena. Back then, again, even things fell through. The person that had brought me over there ended up leaving, and I kind of jumped ship, and thankfully ultimately ended up landing with the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. There probably would have been some value to sticking it out there a little bit longer to see things through. But everyone's career is different. When I was in Grand Rapids with the Griffins, Matt Batchelder, who's still there, who was awesome to work with, gave me some advice and said, look, in your career, if you stay somewhere, it might take a little bit longer to grow, but there's value there. There's also value. Sometimes you can move up a little bit quicker as you jump to different opportunities. So it just kind of depends, but I do think there's a lot of value when you hit challenging situations to kind of fight through it and come out on the other side and see, okay, we made it through. And even in my role here at Lake State, this is the longest I've been anywhere. I've gone through the transition of different athletic directors, now different university presidents. And now I've kind of seen from an athletic director standpoint, each person that's come in has brought something different to the table. And I've been able to grow through that versus saying, oh, the athletic director that or the development director that brought me here is leaving. I now need to jump ship. Of course there's a feeling out period, but I've found it's good to get a little bit uncomfortable at times.
Well, see, that's the thing, and I don't care whether it's college athletics, pro sports, whatever. We always have this, what I would call the Game of Thrones aspect, to where it's like you're also worried because it's not who speaks, but who gets listened to. And when the new person comes on board or in charge, and I'm sure you face that at both things, you're kind of also, you mentioned the feeling out, but you're also wondering, is this person just going to bring in their own people or want to do their own thing, and I might not be part of the solution? How do you make sure that you're not sucking up, but making sure that you have a good communication, pipeline with that new person to make sure they understand what your role is before somebody who may or may not have the same personality with you decides otherwise?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it goes back to control what you can control. And that's true in ticket sales and development. If you start worrying about other things that are out of your control to some degree, you're going to do more harm than good. But if you can provide value and continue to do your job and do it at a high level, that new person is going to notice, right? You talk about student athletes all the time. If you're good enough, people are going to notice, regardless of where you're at or what you're doing. And so that's the mindset I try to speak. Now, the approach I take, right? New athletic director comes in. I'm doing all the things of, hey, I'm making sure I'm proactively reaching out to them, making sure I'm showing up to things, getting FaceTime with them. But again, like with anything, when you're selling or soliciting donations or meeting new people, be genuine, be consistent, do the right things, and ultimately things turn out how they're supposed to. I always talk about one of my biggest groups with the Padres. So the Mets have a fan group called the Seven Line Army, right? Huge fan group. And so, through training with different teams, and every team does this, right? You talk about asking the right questions, be consistent, do the right thing. So I had this Dodgers fan group that had been coming out for a bunch of years that I inherited. I never really met the group leader, so ultimately I said, "Hey, let's get you on the field for batting practice when you guys come to the Dodgers game." Of course, did not let him wear Dodgers gear on the Padres field, but I just started asking him questions and said, "Hey, there's got to be other groups like you guys out there that travel for games." He turns to me and goes, "Oh, you got to reach out to the Seven Line Army. These guys are awesome." So okay, it's the off season and I'm poking around and couldn't find any contact info. So I just messaged the Seven Line Army on Twitter, say, have you guys ever considered coming out to San Diego? That turns into the group leader there at the time sends me a message. I get on the phone with him. We get everything set up. Just so happens that's the game where Bartolo Colon hits a home run when they were all there. Like you couldn't have scripted that, but that sale for myself and the organization and that experience for that group came from being consistent, asking the right questions, doing the right thing, and so it kind of all circles back to that.
Well, and the fact that you were at the Padres, but then you went to the Gulls. Wasn't that the first year of the Gulls? That was one of the first years that they had launched, right? I mean, that's pretty exciting in itself, right?
Yeah, it was. So their season had started. I think I was going on my year. It was probably into year 3 with the Padres. And Kurt Waugh, who's still there, who was an American Hockey League guy, who was awesome to work with. Had some relationships there, and it was something where I had verbalized that I eventually wanted to be a manager, and it was kind of a perfect storm where I knew the American Hockey League, I knew the San Diego market, they knew I wanted to be a manager. There wasn't necessarily something imminent, at the Padres. And so the opportunity just arose where they were looking for a group sales manager. It was just kind of right place, right time, right fit. And so I ended up making the move over there. And again, the Gulls is an amazing organization. The Padres are an amazing organization. I've been very, very fortunate to work with some really great people and really top tier organizations. And I've learned a lot from that too, right? You really see from ownership on down how well we were treated and how that can impact an entire organization.
Well, and I think that's interesting in itself, just the whole launch of something that becomes not only successful, but, really takes on an environment that, let's be honest, in San Diego, there's not much to do in the winter, right? They don't have a basketball team that went up to LA, and, they don't have a football team that went up to LA, so they kind of have that environment to themselves. Did you find people that were really just excited to have something to do in San Diego when it's, I mean, what, 60 degrees rather than perfect 82?
I mean, really, first off, I was fortunate and I was very fortunate to be able to start there, even though it was the first season, right? They had already started playing. So Nate Beasley, Ari Siegel, Derek Dawson, that whole crew had really put the infrastructure in place that I stepped into. But I remember one of the first groups I worked, I did I inherited charter school night when I was with the Padres, right? So I helped grow that. One of the first things I did in going to the Gulls, and it had nothing to do with the weather or nothing to do, I said, okay, I'm just going to, start reaching out to the group leaders that I have a relationship. And even though it was a quick turnaround, let's do a charter school night with the Gulls and talk about experiences that we can provide. And it ended to just, it ended up working out nicely and focusing on, the core of what we're selling and what we're doing and the experience we could provide, not necessarily worrying about the weather or things out of our control that weren't going on. But I mean, San Diego is an amazing hockey environment. Like getting 10,000 plus people in that rink, games where it's the Gulls versus the Ontario Reign and just that atmosphere. When you walk around the concourse there, right, you see jerseys from teams all over the country. You have a lot of transplants in San Diego that are hockey fans. But they also do a really good job of providing a really top-notch experience when people come out to the games.
Well, if you were training new reps now, or new folks that are trying to get into this industry to understand ticket sales or even annual development, what are the things that you would really focus on that maybe would be a component of training that they might not get otherwise?
I mean, I think the biggest thing comes back to you got to be comfortable just asking questions, and it just takes a different mindset. You have to be willing to just ask questions and be genuinely curious about who you're talking to and what they're doing and what they're all about, and understanding what makes them click. Why are they excited in coming to the game? Why are they interested in supporting the program? That you're looking at. So it really just comes down to being able to ask those questions and then being willing to dig past that first layer, right? I mentioned with the 7-line army, I had to message them on Twitter to get their contact information. I can't tell you how many or whether I'm trying to solicit a new donor. I'm looking at LinkedIn, I'm doing Google searches, I'm going on social media, I'm trying to find a different angle to get in touch with these different people. It's so easy, whether in ticket sales or in development, to say, well, I did a Google search or I went on the company website and I couldn't find the contact info, or I got stonewalled by the executive assistant, and so I'm just going to move on to the next thing. It just goes down to being consistent, doing the digging, being willing to do the right things, and just you see so many times where a group never comes to fruition, and it's just because that extra digging and that extra layer, those extra questions were never asked.
I always enjoy the executive assistant thing. I think some of the times they roadblock is because they know that they might be stuck with actually arranging all the tickets if it's a go, right? So there's some of that. In terms of your entire, thing, I mean, now you can be a private investigator, right? I mean, you've been able to dig and go through that, kind of stuff. I'm always maybe that might be, something that we might have to look into for, sales trainers, how to be a private investigator, right? Because you got to dig a little deeper than, what people are normally looking at, right?
And yeah, you got to be willing to dig deep. And I'll use an example of our golf outing this summer. So I won't say the business, but just yesterday, I'm an executive assistant of a business that has, come out the last bunch of years. Say, hey, I talked to so and so, and they said they're not gonna, they said, hey, not this year, not gonna be a fit. Okay, so it's April 10th that I'm being told that. And typically I've worked through the executive assistant. Probably come June timeframe, I might go around the executive assistant, and hopefully they're not listening, but go around the executive assistant and say to this person, hey, I know so and so told me probably wasn't going to be a fit this year, but as we're getting closer, wanted to reach out to see if there's an opportunity to have you guys up here. At the very least, would love to have a conversation, catch up, whatnot, and kind of see their angle there. And it could be something as simple as, oh yeah, back in April, I had XYZ planned, but that fell through. So yeah, we can sponsor it and come out and play this year. Still might be a no, but I'm not going to know if it's a no or a yes unless I dig that extra layer and ask the question.
You know how this is going to work. I can lay out the scenario. It's going to be you're going to sell 104, right? So it's beyond the maximum of what you can have in the tournament. And the day that you do that, the next day, the person will call with two foursomes, and they'll demand. And of course, they'll be upset that, well, what are you talking about? I don't know why would that executive assistant do that? That's, you know what I mean? There's always this weird blame game at the end.
I last year I had the best reason to drive urgency. So our third child, she was born in the middle of July. The golf outing is the beginning of August. So I started reaching out to people a little bit earlier, actually in March, and I was saying, "Hey, I'm having a baby in July, so I'm trying to get things squared away a little bit earlier." And everyone was so receptive and so, oh, congratulations, and it put everyone in such a positive mindset that it was probably the easiest way and the truthful way to drive urgency that I've ever had.
See, what you've got to do this year is have it where you have a photo of the child and say that, look, we've got to do XYZ. Otherwise, the kid won't, go to like, daycare, like, something, right? Hold the kid hostage now. The
It,
kid is now a branding mechanism. It's got its own NIL.
And God bless my kids. I'm up for re-election this year on the city commission. And when I go out campaigning and knocking on doors and that type of stuff, I usually bring one, if not all the kids with me, because it's a lot less threatening if I'm knocking on somebody's door holding a 2-year-old or pulling a bunch of kids in a wagon, versus if I'm just walking around myself knocking on doors, saying hello to people. So they have seen it all. They come to hockey and basketball games all the time here. Our daughter was born when I was in Lehigh Valley. So I think I've got a picture of my wife wearing her at a game, like eating a cheesesteak on top of her head. So they've gotten some cool life experiences, and have seen it all and are good sports about it.
Wait, so you're telling me that really we can use children as billboards for our own political efforts? That's like become wrong, but kissing babies has always been a thing, right?
Exactly. So I've trained them to say vote daddy for city commission. My wife took a video one time at a meeting, because they're on TV, and our son, who's 3 now, he was 2 at the time, was yelling at the TV like, "Daddy, daddy, daddy. Why is daddy not talking back to me?" So they eat it up, and it's been a lot of fun.
Well, fantastic stuff, Andrew. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Always good to, find out. And then when you are a U.S. senator at some point, because of your child, we'll have you to blame for any kind of issues with the federal government, right?
Yeah, exactly. I gotta win an election first. We had a seat open up, and I was fortunate enough to get appointed. So now I actually got to go out and campaign for my seat, and we'll see what happens. I gotta win an election first before I start thinking about anything else.
Thank you for listening to the Tao of Sports podcast, focusing on the world of sports business. Download our free iPhone, iPad app in the iTunes App Store, an Android app available on Amazon to listen to the entire archive. Or check out sportstao.com for more podcasts, blog posts, and videos. All episodes of the Tao of Sports podcast are copyrighted and trademarked.